All right, welcome to the show, Dave Landau, in a hotel room somewhere in America. Where? Where in America are you?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay. Are you doing the? I think I saw on Twitter. Are you doing the mothership?
Yes, Mothership and a couple podcasts. I just drove up from Dallas where my studio is. So, yeah, I'm just staying the night in this fancy, whatever. I don't know what this is.
It's
Motel 6? No, I'm kidding.
yeah. Well,
I'd rather be dead.
I mean the mothership. I'm throwing around like inside comedy lingo here. Mothership. That's the Joe Rogan. That's the Joe Rogan Club for the people. You know, there's a lot of squares listen to my podcast, Dave, and so they don't know what the mothership is.
Yes, the Mothership is Joe's Club, and I'm doing Adam Egan's show. He used to be Norm Macdonald's co-host on the Netflix show.
Oh yeah,
So I do his showcases periodically. So it's pretty fun. You just go up and do new stuff, have fun.
that's great. Now, I think I saw the Kill Tony show. That was at the mothership, right? The other day they did Kill Tony, and it was Tucker Carlson showed up, and that was all over the internet.
Yeah, that exploded that he was on that show.
Yeah, and it was funny because I showed the clip to my wife, and she didn't. She was like, "What's Kill Tony?" And I said, "Denise, you don't even understand. Like, there are people now who no one has ever heard of, from her world. No one's ever heard of them. They're selling out Carnegie Hall, or Madison Square Garden, whatever. And I think Kill Tony is one of those phenomena. Am I right?
Yeah, Kill Tony just sold out Madison Square Garden. It's an open mic, essentially. It's an open mic that's judged by people that has a band. Like we're living in a whole new world of just crazy where, yeah, and it's weird because, like, I guess Kill Tony and Tucker Carlson don't have the crossover you would assume, obviously, that a former Fox News anchor and Tony Hinchcliffe would have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just selling out Madison Square Garden. I think they sold out whatever cell phone Cricket Wireless Convention Center in Los Angeles. I don't know what it is, but it's just one of those another like giant arena shows with an open mic and a band. Like it's everything's crazy now. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't. It's like comedy's like nothing I've ever seen.
Now, what's crazy is you and your career. Let me try to see if I can keep up with it. Basically, like I told you, when I had to delay our meeting today because I had to pick up my daughter from lacrosse, but I said we only need a
Yes.
half hour because I like to kind of get in, do it, get out. And my goal for today is to share with people the interesting career you've had over the past few years. And I think when we last got together, it was probably on Fox, right? Did you come on and do?
Red Eye, when you had Red Eye, I
Okay,
think
so
was the
that was
last
it.
time
That's even more back. I thought you might have done the radio show after.
Oh, I did. No, I did the
Yeah.
radio show, and then I did on PC with you several times, and then
Yes.
the game show too. We did the
That's right.
game show.
Okay, good, good.
That's
So
right.
you were in
Okay.
that
Yeah.
era
Yeah.
as well. But
Yes.
so basically, just to review, and I think just for my own edification, you were working with Anthony Cumia on his network, and you were kind of his sidekick, right?
Artie Lang and Anthony Cumia originally, and then me and Anthony. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you left Anthony's network, and you kind of struck out on your own, right?
No, I went to Crowder.
Okay, you went right to Crowder. I thought
Right
there
to
was a
Crowder.
little,
Yeah.
a little solo experiment in between there. You went to Crowder,
Oh
who's
no, it was
another guy.
still a strikeout technically, but yeah, I went there.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
because Crowder at the time, I think he was, because I used to go down to Kumia's studio in Manhattan, and I think Crowder was also using that space or that floor or that building, right?
He might have at one time. I don't know. By the time I got there, he had already been in Dallas, I think,
Yeah.
at that point.
Okay.
So yeah, I think he was though a while ago. He had been using some space in New York.
Yeah, I think when I was doing Red Eye, sometimes I would run down there to check out the compound media stuff or whatever. Like
Yeah.
Gavin McInnes would be going on the show or whatever. Then I'd
Yes.
go there, and then I think Steven Crowder would be waiting to set up to go on, and I think he might have been either leasing space or sharing space with Cumia at the time, and that's probably
That
the
seems
last.
right.
Yeah, so that's the last time I think I saw him. But then he went to Dallas and just became his own network that of massive proportions that I don't think I even really understand to this day. Like he's huge, right? Crowder.
Oh yeah, he's massive.
He's
I mean,
massive.
he's massive. And I took a noble stance and walked off of that. So do that, kids. when you have, when you're making a bunch of money, just leave.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it's
you were doing I mean, you were cranking out sketches and doing, I mean, were
yes.
you also doing hosting a show for him, or were you co-hosting with him, or what was your relationship when you did Steven Crowder's network?
I was well, I guess co-host, and then you could say like head comedy writer,
Yeah.
and that was basically, and then I was like the head sketch comedy writer. Like I wasn't really into like so much the research and the political part where it actually mattered. That went to people much smarter than me, but I just would kind of write out the comedy portions of the show.
Yeah. And then you left there.
Yes,
How long were you there at Crowder?
a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
Year and a half. And then did you leave?
Yeah,
Was there any kind of controversy? Because I feel like there was, every time I see, like, I'll go onto Twitter and it's like Steven Crowder has all these controversies or something. I don't really understand them,
yeah,
but I feel like he's at some point he got way bigger than I ever knew, and I was like, oh God,
yeah.
this guy's an industry unto himself. And then there was like, I think, divorces and firing people, and then there was like a fight with Ben Shapiro, but everybody fights with Ben Shapiro, right?
I think that's common. I don't know for sure, but it
It was,
seems that there's a lot of arguments.
yeah, there was like a thing where he was like, took like they made him an offer, and then he put the offer on the internet or something. It's hard for me to follow some of this, some of the infighting in the right wing world.
There's
Uh,
so much of it. It it's obnoxious. Like how many like people are supposed to be part of this supposed movement, but then just attack each other. It's like this is great, guys. We're really, really taking steps forward
yeah,
in this
yeah,
whole right wing sphere.
yeah,
Yeah, it's his personal life. I don't know too much about. My whole thing came down where it just came down to a contract for me,
yeah,
and there were a few behind the scenes personal issues, but it just came down to a contract where he called out the Daily Wire over like a $50 million contract he didn't want, and then I was kind of I was a bit pissed because my contract was extremely strict and wouldn't allow me to do stand up or really work the road. And that was for much less money, way less than 50 million. In fact, you could just you could remove the five and one of the zeros. Just, but yeah, so it was more of a thing where I left and I created my own pilot called Normal World, which was fully sketch comedy,
yeah,
and I ended up pitching that to the Blaze after I left, and I pitched it to a few places, but they were the kind of the ones that took it, and I've just been doing that on my own now as a sketch comedy variety talk show. It's almost like red eye sketch, late night, everything combined into one thing, like what I like about late night shows.
yeah. And so, when do you shoot that?
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at Blaze, and then it airs at 10/9 Central.
Oh, okay. What time do you tape?
We usually tape at 6, but if people think it's live, you can think that too.
Yeah,
So it's live, but a
yeah.
lot of people think it's live.
A lot of people think, yeah, that's what that. I often do that. Tell you the truth, this podcast here, it might be live,
They
but
don't
if it,
know.
yeah, they don't know if I've pre-taped it. But I like to go live because that's the best way. You go live. I go live on Twitter. I go live on Instagram, and things that are live do better. So
I
this,
agree.
yeah,
I agree. And also, the way that my staff works is they don't care. So it's almost as if it's live because nothing's ever taken out or changed. Even if you're like, hey, could you change that and take it out? They're like, sure. And then they don't.
yeah.
So it all gets the same feel as a good live show if it's a train wreck.
Yeah, yeah. So that show, the normal world is doing great, and it's getting like your videos get just like you'll put a sketch up there, and it will get millions of views, right?
No, I appreciate you pretending. It does.
Wait,
They do fine.
they get millions. What was I just saw one the other day, and I think it had an M after it. It was like something million, like 30
You know,
million
some get
views.
millions. Yeah, some
Yeah,
get
they get
millions on
millions.
on Instagram, especially, and a couple other places. Usually, my stand up is what will, but yeah, usually some will get a million, and then some will get pulled. Like we just put up a Austin Powers Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, I think
Sketch.
that's in the millions. That got millions of views.
It was, and then they put it they copyright or not copyright, but they struck it for misinformation. So then that got pulled down, even though it's a
Oh, that's funny.
parody of me as Klaus Schwab as Dr. Evil. But
Oh my gosh,
apparently
I
that
wish I could show it. Maybe I'll. People have to now. No reason for me to show it here because people should go and watch it and contribute to the millions of views that it's getting. But the funniest thing that could be called for misinformation because you don't even glue the bald cap to your head; it's just
no.
hanging loosely off your.
Yes. Yeah, it's very little effort. It's like I didn't even find glasses in time to shoot the sketch. And
Ah,
it looks really good, except for my costume as the main character. And then when we do that, yeah, and then they put that out as if that was actual somehow a news source or something we were going for to
yeah,
let people know what was really going on, that he was in the hospital because he had overdosed on bug juice.
right, right. That's right. And then you had the mustache. Who's that girl
Yeah.
who's pointed out the mustache? She's funny.
Oh, that's Angela Boggs. She's one of the people on the show. She's really, really a great sketch actress, and she also is a producer on the show.
Oh, that's great. So it looks good too. I mean, and so I knew that there was some kind of relationship with the Blaze, but did you go solo and then the Blaze kind of picked you up and they're kind of distributing you, or what's your relationship with them?
Yeah, I ended up going solo, and a lot of people thought because I was on Crowder that I kind of just stayed with them, or already knew them, and realistically, I didn't. I met Glenn Beck really only like a year ago, maybe when I did his podcast. But I went over there and I just pitched the show. They liked the sketches. Then they turned it into more of a sketch podcast, just because it's cheaper to make, so that's good. And
Right. What's cheaper? It's cheap.
it's cheaper to make the podcast.
Uh-huh.
And it's also very, I mean, it's very, very hard to produce just a sketch show. It takes a lot of time and energy. So
I would
we
think.
end up doing, yeah, it's like really expensive and hard. So we do a couple a week, a few a week. But I ended up going over there and I pitched my show and they loved it. And the original pilot's called Normal World. That's on my own YouTube, which is comedian Dave Landau. And it's a half-hour show that takes place in a dystopian future that's like 2 years in advance. And so it's about a year and a half old, so pretty much everything in it has come true now.
Yeah.
But that was the whole premise, is basically it was just slightly into the future and a little bit absurd, and a little bit of, 1984,
Wow, that's
little
high concept.
Orwellian.
Very
Yeah,
high
it
concept.
was. It was, except yeah, it was high concept mixed with, male tampon commercials, those sort of things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, yeah, it's a mix, but
But
yeah,
if you're doing high concept though, it's so that's the show. That's not what the podcast does. The normal world is it is in a dystopian future, but when you do the podcast, you have to kind of deal with all the issues of the day, right? You can't be living in a future world.
No, it's weird how we like to kind of do it, where
Oh, okay.
the set itself behind me is actually burnt down buildings from Detroit, which is where I grew up, so it has a nice dystopian feel.
Uh-huh.
And then the other side is like the future. It's like space, desert, because there'll be no one and nothing.
Yeah.
But we do talk about just, yeah, everything that goes on during the day. But I like to also just do interviews. It ranges from musicians to actors to whoever we want to talk about and whatever we want to talk about, while giving people a little bit of news. But so much stuff is just black pilled now that we kind of like to take a slightly lighter side of it, which is still dark enough to be inside of that realm.
Yeah. What's the black pill? I thought it was red pill. Red pill was people who kind of but is black pill it's like
Black
uh
pill is just bleak and like nothing is ever going to be good, and that we
uh-huh.
all just have to worry all the time about the fact that there will be no future and no happiness.
Uh-huh.
And I would say no, that's not red pilled. Red pilled is just the start of that.
Yeah.
And then slowly you realize there's no hope, which is fine. I get it. I'm a comic, though. You're a comic.
Yeah.
If we didn't have a little bit of that, we wouldn't be comedians. But you also we keep it lighthearted at some ways.
Well, it's also it's when it becomes so bleak, when you think there's no returning, then that way you can throw your hands up and say, well, let's just joke about it then. I mean, if you're in the fight and you're thinking in terms of like, oh, winning elections, or we've got to get the people out there to, then you're like, it's hard to joke around because it's all work that you've made for yourself. But if you think that it was like the way that I think I've seen videos of Carlin, the way Carlin talked about the world, that Carlin had no patriotism, no love of humanity. He didn't even believe in human beings, he said. And that
Hmm.
gave him I don't think that way, but that's the way he thought. And he thought his absolute cynicism, to absolutely not even have a warm regard for the human race, he thought that it gave him the freedom to kind of joke about everything and have a perspective. You know what I'm saying?
And I think it did, and that's one of the things he said. He said the problem is people in groups were always the issue, and people individually were fine. He goes, but sometimes groups as much as two could be a serious problem. And that's how Carlin decided that once he realized that he could take everything, and as long as his character, really his stage character, because he started more in acting and he started as a two-person show. But once he figured out that character of everything is just ridiculous and was able to point it out from that angle, he was able to insult everything. And that's kind of where I stand. Like I don't really have an allegiance to anything. And I'm very blunt about it on the show. It doesn't mean that I don't love my country and I'm not happy, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in family or care about my kid. I just don't believe in government or people that are in charge of anything, and I don't trust anybody to do a good job because it's never been proven to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I'm not as bleak because I'm Catholic, so and Catholics
Oh,
also
me
have that
too.
same. You are, yeah. So
Yeah.
the Catholics that I know are, and the more trad they are, the more religious they are, the less they're worried about the day-to-day world because they don't care about, oh, this government of men, they think of the kingdom of God. So they're looking toward the afterlife. So they have a way of being very flippant about the activities of the day. And they wake up after an election and they're not crying their eyes out, they just move on with their life.
Well, yeah, at least being Catholic when I was young, you're riddled with so much guilt at times, and it's just part of it. And I mean it as somebody who's still Catholic. You go through it, and yeah, you have. I don't look to human beings to make my life better, so I never expect them to in that way. Where I never look at a leader, I never see a person and go, "It's a good leader." Because
Yeah.
they're not. I mean, anybody. From I don't care if it's David Koresh or Biden or whoever. It's chances are you're probably flawed. You're
Like that you
probably
went
gonna.
there, Dave. You're like, I don't care. I don't think leaders are good. I don't care who you are. You could be David Koresh, and I don't trust you.
What if he was the right one? No, it's like I'm just so close to Waco right now. Yeah, it's always every one of those groups is just funny. The cult groups. I don't know
Oh
why I
yeah.
find it so amusing because it always just turns into sex. They just go. It just waits a couple
Oh yeah.
months and then it turns into I'll sleep with your women and take that burden. And then
Yeah.
one guy's like, I don't know if I believe you, and they're like, we got to start shooting the men.
Yeah. I
It's
know.
just how
That's
it
why
all plays out.
I love there's a documentary about the Bikram yoga, Bikram Chowdhury, and all the women are so surprised. They're like, I thought he was such a, an outstanding human being. It's like, you did the guy who like, the guy was in like a thong surrounded by women, and he was obviously a cult leader, like the idea that it was surprising that he asked them for massages, it's like,
Right.
really? I thought that's the least he would do.
Well, and every one of them you see, and you're like, they're very charismatic, and you're like, none of them were like. I'll give it to you. Jim Jones had a little bit of charisma up until towards the end,
Yeah.
where he seemed like a complete psycho, which is
Yeah.
also, although horrible what happened, kind of amusing that somebody handed a congressman a note that said help, and his natural response was to just go, ugh, and just drop it on the ground, and then the whole thing went awry. It's like someone, like, why would you
Yeah.
assume your first reaction is to throw the note on the ground?
Yeah.
But
Don't
they
drop
all
it.
seem so creepy. But then recently, the one who kind of has a cult is Jared Leto.
He had a cult.
Kind of. He's like
Yeah.
out in the desert. He dresses a bit like Jesus, has the beard and long hair, and he still has a lot of women who follow him. But it's Jared Leto, who's a movie star. So I'm kind of like, I guess I get it. I
Yeah.
mean, I know it's wrong, but I can see the charisma or the attraction women would have to follow him more
Yeah.
than, say, a Dave or a Marshall Applewhite, who's like, listen, we're gonna castrate ourselves, and then we'll all be on Haley's Comet. People are like, yeah, go on. I'll do that. Do we get to wear matching shoes?
Yeah, that one was like that really proves it that if you're wondering, if you're thinking about getting in the game, he he proves it that you can be a pretty far gone person and you can start a cult.
Oh, and everything about him, just his eyes were
Yeah.
like there was nothing appealing where if you looked at him, you wouldn't go, well, this guy
Yeah.
has it together. Go
Yeah.
on.
He didn't put you at ease. He didn't.
He just made you more nervous and just wanted to keep a distance. But for some reason, there was a great group of people that were like, no, it's just something about him. It's like, are you sure you're not just sad? Just
Certainly. So, okay, so you got the show now.
yes,
How did you was there a transition into this kind of political world? Because you were a stand-up, and then
yes.
and all I knew is when you came and did Red Eye, you were good at talking about the issues, and we're like, oh, this guy's great. Let's have him on again. But were you a political comic at the time, or were you doing back in the Red Eye days? Were you doing other panel shows? And would you consider yourself someone who did uh, humor about the issues of the day?
You and Anthony, I mean, other than, touring around and doing radio like you would as a comic, which always tend to work. Like I would do that, like local news in Detroit and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
No, you and Anthony were the first people to put me on, actually. And so it was really those early shows that kind of I started looking at it. I started at Second City when I was 19.
Oh, you did
So I
in
did,
Chicago.
yeah. In Detroit, actually, it was the Detroit chapter, and they put out like Keegan Michael Key and Tim Robinson, who has the I Think You Should Leave show. He
Yep.
was there when I was there. So when I started writing and doing stuff with them, it was political. So I was always making fun of political people in politics in some way. Sometimes it was local, like at the time we had Kwame Kilpatrick, who Trump pardoned, which was like the funniest, best thing in the world to me. He was the mayor of Detroit who bought a Lincoln Navigator and just drove it around, and everybody knew he took the city's money for it. But I love the guy because I was like, I love that he's a criminal, but he's also building parks. Like there was
Yeah.
just something about him that I enjoyed. I
And
mean,
Trump
sure,
pardoned
he
him.
pardoned him, yeah. It was one of the things he did when he left office where he found a imprisoned Democratic mayor who allegedly killed a hooker and then just was like, "You can go." And I think he was serving like 30 years. It's great.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty fun to watch on the way out. I think it was a pretty good middle finger to everyone. It really made me laugh. I don't know why he did it, but I enjoyed watching people not know what to make of it because
Yeah.
Trump supporters didn't want to side with uh, letting the Democratic mayor out of prison, who was found guilty of I think 6 or 7 different counts. And then the left didn't really dislike him or want to admit it, so everybody sort of just was quiet about it, which I think is why people don't really know that happened.
Yeah. And I wonder if that, I mean, does he still have a kind of any kind of movement or political machine in Detroit? This guy, Kwame Kilpatrick, does he have like a, I don't know.
No, he might still have a funneling scheme. The
Yeah,
water,
maybe.
yeah, I don't know,
Well,
but
that's what,
I
we got an election coming up. So is Trump, was that kind of maybe a strategic move? Obviously, Michigan is a huge state for Trump, right?
yes.
And so is there some kind of thing where he's making a play for the certain certain neighborhoods in Detroit, maybe, and some part of the black vote that still identifies with this guy or whatever? I don't know.
I think he might have had that already, and this just may have solidified it a little bit,
Uh-huh.
because in that area, if people look him up, at one point Kwame looked a bit like Suge Knight. He had like a big rock he would wear, and
Uh-huh.
he threw the what was it? The Detroit Electronic Music Festival downtown Detroit, where you would have people would come from all over for the first time ever to see a concert in downtown Detroit, or various concerts, which they would, take ecstasy and drugs and dance, but it was just not something that was seen a lot downtown. And in fact, in 2003, Ford made was it the Ford Focus, um, yeah, the Ford Focus, whatever the event's called. But
Yeah.
it was basically a car designed for people on ecstasy. It was astonishing to see. Even the ad was like people dancing with glow sticks in the car. And I'd never seen anything like it. I'm like, you got a car sponsor for a drug. It was amazing. But I think it was kind of maybe Trump's way of proving that he had more of the black vote than
Mhm.
people were giving him, or at least he believes so. But I thought it was an interesting play on the way out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're a Detroit guy. You did Second City, and then were you? So you kind of take classes, and then it's like improv and sketch, right?
Yes.
Um, and then you were doing shows like at the Second City Theater.
It was improv and sketch, and then I was also taking writing classes. So we were writing shows. We did one called Meet in the Middle, which was that's a pun, but it was about a group of. This was in 2004, and it was a show that came out there, and it was about the gay people and the straight people decided to live in separate parts of town
Uh huh.
until they realized, like, one of the straight guys' Subaru dealerships closed down, and then a gay guy's florist, his company shut down because there was no more husbands to buy flowers for their
Yeah.
wives
Yeah.
that were angry, that sort of thing. So we had different sketches throughout, but then it was a musical where they came together at the end.
Yeah.
And so that was successful. We had one called the DeVito Code, which was just a bunch of sketches based on, the Da Vinci Code that was very popular at the time. And I was more of an understudy. So I went from that to starting in stand up at the same time. And I started headlining after about 7 months because I was used to being on stage, and I was used to performing and writing,
Yeah.
and it was paying, which improv just didn't.
Yeah.
And I just started going on the road. And granted, a lot of people who stuck with it are far better off than me, but I just started going on the road because I was 21 years old, and I just started getting booked at a bunch of clubs, and I spent the next 14 years on the road before I started doing Anthony's show.
Wow. And did you move to New York?
I moved to New York when I started doing Anthony's show.
Okay, but you
Other
were
than
basically
that,
a road warrior up until that point.
only other time I wasn't was when I got brought to LA I was going to get hired to do the new incarnation of In Living Color as a writer, and
Mhm.
then they canceled the show almost immediately, and I already had an apartment. So I hung around LA for a year, and that was pretty much the only time I was ever outside of just being a road dog.
Yeah. And so that was that the biggest gig you lost? Because that's kind of huge. So you were doing stand up, then you got
Mhm.
hired. You were going to be a writer for In Living Color, which would have been like living in LA, making a good salary, working with top people, and it just totally fell through. Is there
Yes.
was there a bigger that was probably the biggest career letdown of up to that time. Was does it stand as the biggest? or have there been bigger ones?
Oh, there's been so many. It's tough to say. Uh, I got Last Comic Standing in 2014, where I kept advancing, and
Yeah,
then I was uh, kicked off the show supposedly because Roseanne didn't get a joke, even though she really loved me up until that point.
yeah,
And I was Keenan Ivory Wayne's favorite, which was
yeah,
another huge thing, and because he was one of my heroes, and Russell Peters. And then I find out years later that it was just a matter of I was too edgy or not exactly the demographics they were looking for,
yeah.
and that
The
sort of
producers
which
wrote
is
you out of it.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
which was a bummer. That was a bummer. I got Letterman, and then Eddie got canned, so that was cool. So I never made it
Oh,
on the
that is
show.
unbelievable. That's the biggest. You got Letterman,
Yeah,
and then you
a-
lost Letterman.
and the only thing that saved me on that was one time Eddie came on Compound when we were with when I was with Anthony, and was like, "Yeah, and then that happened. Otherwise, he'd probably have done it 5 times by now." And I was like, "See, at least that's the proof." Because like it was that was one. Conan was one that I got and then didn't get. And then it was
A
uh,
stand-up appearance on there.
correct.
Yeah, and it just what? Like, oh, we selected you, but then we're gonna work in a date, and then it just never happened.
They were going to work in a date, and I was working out the set, and he loved the set, and then I had been burned so many times in show business because I had done Live at Gotham when I was like 23. Then I did a whole bunch of other shows. I did This Is Not Happening for Comedy Central. Like Ari booked me on it right away when he had saw me. So a lot of things did pan out, but I had never done late night. And it was something that I always wanted. And like the Tonight Show guys liked me. They ended up leaving. So that was like my first time I got burned. This is
Yeah,
long and heartbreaking. But yeah, it was the first ones where it was the two guys who were with Jay back in like '07 or '08, and they liked me for the show, and then they left pretty much right after they liked me. So with Conan, I got pushy, and I'll just say it, with JP Buck, I got a crappy attitude with him, and I was like, hey, you know how you just said you were going to give me the day? You should probably just do that, because this is getting ridiculous. So just tell me when I should be there. And I ended up being, I got, I just was a dick to him, bottom line. But it had been several months,
yeah,
and it's like, can you just give me the date and not
yeah,
be and I was tired of it.
yeah.
And he's like, all right, we don't have to do this. So I did it to myself. I admit
Uh-huh.
it. But at the
It could
same
have gone the other
time,
way, though. Sometimes those things where you put your foot down, they work. Sometimes you never know. I mean, half a dozen on one hand, the other. A guy could be the other end of the phone saying, "You're right, you're right, you're right." Um, let's give you a date right now. And then
yes.
you would have said, "You know what? Ask for something and you will get it." And that would have been the lesson there.
And that was he was not in a mood that day.
Yeah.
And there was a couple things that had happened in my life at that time that I was massively depressed and just pissed. And I was like, could I get a win,
Yeah.
please? And it was not the right call, but I don't know if I regret it. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, it's good.
Conan's my
It's a good
hero, but
story.
I don't know if I regret it, because I also feel like, why did you hold it over me? Why did you do that to me? I mean, was it that hard to I mean, like, I really wanted Craig Ferguson was one I really would have done. I never knew who booked it, but I loved Craig Ferguson.
Yeah.
That was a show I loved. But yeah, with all those shows, every one that I got, it kind of just fell through. And the two were of no control of mine whatsoever. And then the third one was my fault, you could say. But at the same time, if you promise somebody a dream they've had from the time they were like 10, like, don't hold it over their head and just constantly dangle it in front of them. And that's why
Yeah.
in my life, when I promise somebody to open for me or be on my show or anything, I don't I don't break those promises. And I stand by doing the right thing for people. And I feel like he should have done that for me. I still feel that way, but I could have gone about it in a more tactful manner.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think I'm going to make up a silver lining here because these were in those days, like you said, stand up was The Tonight Show, Letterman. Like when you were for years, for a decade, you're working to get on those shows because that was the brass ring was getting on Letterman, especially. At first it was the Tonight Show with Carson, and then once Johnny had retired, then it became Letterman for sure. Was the ultimate goal, I think. For
Letterman was mine because that was Carson for me. Letterman was Carson
yeah.
for me. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but that was the thing. So if you had gotten that right, I mean, it's impossible to say, but right now you are part of this world that has been created that doesn't need any of that. So it's almost like the proof is in the pudding because, like you said, stand-up is absolutely crazy now. You're able to forge your own world. You don't need any of these platforms. You don't need Netflix. Now they're still Netflix is trying to be with their whole Netflix is a joke. They want to be the, we're now the Montreal Comedy Festival and Letterman combined. We're the whole deal, but they're really not. I mean, people have Netflix specials and nobody seems to know what they're doing. They're having trouble selling out rooms. I think you just sold out a theater in Idaho somewhere, didn't you? Didn't you just play a theater gig?
Yeah, last week. Yeah, no, and I do a lot of them, luckily enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very grateful for that. Yeah.
So this is the world that you're in. You kind of just like it's a very unlikely place, but I think it's very interesting. And now you're like a what would you say? You're your own media mogul, right?
No, and it's true. And honestly, the first time I did late night was on a show I created on a network, which is sort of nuts. Like it's not obviously the reach of those old shows, but my first really late night show technically was my own show. So I had to go through all these hoops all these years. And then my first debut is Normal World, which is the late night show at the Blaze.
Yeah. But when you say reach, maybe not in numbers, but because you have this, like we were talking about with the Kill Tony show, the audience has such a connection that their reach is almost like, when they come to town, it's like 90% of the viewers and the listeners come out, whereas like in the old days, you were lucky to get like 0.01% of the Letterman audience to even remember your name.
Oh, and I remember, I mean, just starting when I started, and I mean, I started touring in 2004, so 20 years ago. And I started at Second City in 2001, but I started touring professionally, so I consider myself 20 years as of April 7th. Even going out then, it was all about you just put up a comedy sign or whoever was going to be there. And I mean, you would have the rare draw, but it wouldn't necessarily still be any different than them using sort of that 80s mindset of, well, this guy's funny, we'll put this up. Hopefully they'll bring people in. I mean, some of the people that would bring people in were like Gallagher and Angel Salazar, because he was in Scarface, and people, he's doing, coke in the back room, and literally a janitorial closet, and not Gallagher. He was just smashing melons. But it was entirely different the way that you would promote any of this stuff, and sometimes I think you would just have a sellout show based on word of mouth. Like we had a thing called Motor City Improv, and we sold out every night for 3 years at a place called Joey's Comedy Club in Livonia, Michigan. And that was just word of mouth. And it was not a huge room, about 130, but that was just then and how we were able to get the name out. And we used to do one in a really rough area called the Village Idiot, where it was $5 all you could drink Coors and $5 for an improv ticket, which I don't think is legal at all, but it was in a part of Detroit where nobody would bother you about it.
Yeah.
So we would pack these shows, and people like Sam Richardson is very famous now, and other people would be on those shows. And it was always fun. It was always a blast, but entirely different than the way that it's all promoted now. Now you have one good TikTok video and you might sell out a club for the next year. You might sell out a theater. Yeah, you never know. You never know what's going to hit. But I do think you're right with the connection. I think people need to connect with the person. And when I did that show last week, for example, in Idaho, everyone I talked to was a Normal World fan, minus maybe 2 people who were brought by somebody else, and they enjoyed the show, which was nice.
Yeah, where is it? Somebody said in Malaysia or something. Somebody was talking to you, and they were like, "Oh yeah,
Bangkok."
Bangkok, yeah."
Yeah,
There was a Normal World fan in Bangkok.
Yeah, my friend Yoshi was in Bangkok, and a guy stopped him and was like, "Are you Yoshi?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm performing tonight." They're like, "Wow, from Normal World," and I'm like, "Oh, that's nice. We have sex tourists that are big
There's other things happen in Bangkok, right? Come
fans."
on.
I guess.
Yeah. So that's great. So for the people that what should they do? Where do they go? I mean, they have how do they
If you
see
go to
your show?
normal, if they go to davelandau.com, please check it out. They can go to see all my tour dates coming up. That's all available on there. And if you go to that website, you can also click on Normal World, which will lead you to the YouTube page where you can subscribe. You can also go to Blaze and subscribe through there. If you use code normal, you get a discount. But the show is available on YouTube, so you can go to it just as well. And please hit subscribe on that. It's just Normal World right on YouTube, and my handles are as well. Everything is Dave on davelandau.com.
All right, that's it. Dave, thanks for doing this in your
Dude, thank you.
grand hotel room, and have a great show. And let me know when you're in New York next.
Absolutely.
I mean, you don't even need New York anymore. You're like, I'm just in Texas. I don't.
It's not the worst. It's decent.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'm
I
gonna
do
get
miss
down.
New York.
But you live in Dallas, though.
I want you to do my show if you come down. I really
Yeah,
hope you would. I'd like to have you in studio.
yeah, yeah. I'd love it. And I'm gonna come back to Dallas because I sold the what was that one? It was in Fort Worth, the Red Room.
Oh, did you do that? The
Yeah.
in Hyenas?
Yes, I did
It's great,
Hyenas.
isn't it?
I did the Red Room because I was like, look, I don't get, I'm not down in Texas a lot, so let me take a small room. So I get the Red Room, but then it sold out like right there. So I just added a second show. I sold that one out. So I did 2 shows there, and then I went over and did Houston after that. But I'll definitely come back to the Dallas Fort Worth area because it was very good.
Dude,
They're
that
good.
little
It's good
red
for
room
gut health.
though. Yeah, that little red room though is so much fun.
Yeah, it was great.
I love that little room. I don't know, it's just those little kill boxes are so much fun. I
Yeah,
really do love that room, and because I'm local, I'd rather just take those rooms more often
yeah,
than the bigger room, and
yep,
it's fun. It's fun to
yeah.
do.
Yeah, because there was a big theater in Houston. It was the I forget.
Majestic.
No, it was like downtown Houston.
Oh, Houston, I don't
It
know.
was
Yeah,
the Zilka Theater or something, but
okay.
it was really nice. But I think I had better shows in Fort Worth because they were, there's something about a comedy club that everyone was packed in there, and they were just, it was just a great audience.
Yeah, there's just a feel to a club. Like, I shot my special, which if people wanna find it, it's called, A Prison 10, and it's available on Amazon as well as Tubi. And it's stories about my life. I'm in recovery and that sort of thing. No, I shouldn't say that sort of thing. It's just I'm in recovery, and it's called A Prison 10 because I would be a prison 10 even if I'm a 5 on the street, and I didn't want to go to prison. So it's available on Amazon and Tubi and all that stuff. And that one I originally shot in a big theater in Dallas, and we ended up releasing it from Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle in Detroit because I just love a club feel.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I did that one time. I'm going back to Detroit, but it's not to the Mark Ridley's. It's the I should know where I'm playing in Detroit, but what else is there?
Well, there's House of Comedy.
House of Comedy.
There's
That's
Are
what
you
I'm
doing
doing.
the one downtown?
Yeah, yeah.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
Let me make sure I don't want to screw that up. TomShalou.com. I got to look at my own dates on here.
Yeah, I used to do the same
Detroit
thing.
House of Comedy.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, you're right across from Tiger Stadium and all that stuff. So you're in a hot part of town.
that's great. That's in May 24th and 25th. So anyway, Dave, this was great having you. Love to get together, and I'll let you know when I'm going to be down in Dallas.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, man. See you later.